Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Regina, and in this video I'm going to show you guys how I take care of my tomatoes so that they have a long, healthy, and productive season. Now, I posted a video when I planted my Indeterminate tomatoes and I gave you guys a few tips there, but I wanted to show you just kind of what that process looks like for me keeping these plants healthy. And so that process includes pruning and staking. That's the number one thing that I do. It also includes fertilization and watering. So if that sounds like information that you want to know, then let's get into it. But before we go, if you've watched my videos before or you're really enjoying this one so far, go ahead and hit that like button. That helps this video get out to more gardeners, and it lets me know that you like it, which, you know, I'd appreciate knowing. And also, as you're watching the video, if you have any tips or anything to add, please put those down in the comments. I would definitely benefit from learning. I'm no 100% expert. There's always something to learn, and I'm sure other gardeners would benefit from what you're doing that's helping your tomato plants as well. And if you like gardening content like this, I'm growing here in North Texas Zone 8A, but of course, I hope that my content is helpful to people growing anywhere. But if you like content like this, you want more gardening content from me, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel so that you won't miss a video. Now that we've talked about that, now let's get into it. So the first thing that I do to keep my tomatoes growing healthy and productive the entire season is to prune them. Now, there are several different schools of thought on pruning tomatoes. Some people think you shouldn't prune them at all, or depending on the variety, you shouldn't prune them. But with the way that I grow, and since this video is about what I do to keep my tomatoes healthy and growing so that you can adopt strategies for your garden, I prune my tomatoes, determinate and indeterminate. But the way that I prune them is different depending on the type. Now, for my indeterminate tomatoes, I grow them up a single stake, and I prune them to 2 main stems. So last season I did 1 leader stem, but it grew really fast, outgrew the stake really fast. So this year I decided to try 2 main leader stems. And so that's how I'm growing them this year. So that means that other than those 2 main stems, once I have those identified, everything else as far as suckers go, and those are the little plants that grow diagonally when you have like a leafing branch, main branch, suckers grow diagonally. And I have to prune all of those off because otherwise they will grow into main stems, and then I'll have a lot of main stems growing, and that doesn't work for the way that I'm trellising my tomatoes on a single stake. I trellis mine that way, one, because it works for me. It allows me to get a lot of varieties in a small space. If I didn't want, I want to say I'm growing 14 or 15 different tomato varieties this year, 3 determinates and the rest are indeterminate. And I'm growing them, giving them just about a square foot of space per plant. So in order to do that, I have to prune them in a certain way for vertical growth and not a lot of wide horizontal growth. Now, if you're okay with, if you only want to have a few different varieties and you have enough space, then you don't necessarily have to prune them that way. You can prune them however you like. But for me to fit in all the different plants I want to have and all those different varieties in the amount of space I have, that's how I have to prune them. But either way, once you determine your method of pruning, how you're going to prune and stake your tomatoes, it's important that you keep up with it in order to keep your plants growing healthy and productive. Because if they start growing out and growing wild, then they're not going to grow into the space that you have allotted for them, which may be fine for one plant, but it might not be fine for the others. So whatever way you've decided to prune them, you want to make sure that you keep to that. Now, another important step in pruning my indeterminates is making sure that I remove excess foliage. So as you can see, I have a whole forest in here because I have so many plants growing in such a small space. So I don't need all of these leaves. Like, of course I prune the suckers, but I also prune foliage that is unnecessary. So if a plant only needs a certain amount of leaves in order to photosynthesize, so I remove leaves that are either shading out a little bit too much or crowding, reducing airflow. I like to go in and remove excess foliage that does that as well, so that all my plants can get sunlight and be productive. Now, you don't want to remove too many leaves because, like I mentioned before, photosynthesis, plants need sun and they need leaves in order to take in that sun. But also, some shading is good. Here in North Texas, we get really, really hot summers, and my tomato plants produce generally all summer long. And I believe that part of that is because I do grow them so close together. There is some shading that happens, so the plants don't completely shut down because they're not exposed to as much heat because they are in here all together. So next, I'm going to prune quite a bit of some of this foliage. So my process for pruning the foliage, aside from what is sitting on the ground that definitely has to go, is just by me looking to see where I can open it up a little bit to let a little more sun in, to let a little more air in, so that my plants can be as healthy as possible. Of course, you want to be able to have airflow circulating within your tomato plants. So as I go through and tie up the rest of them, make sure they're all tied to their stakes appropriately, then I can also go in and then prune any additional foliage that doesn't seem like the plant needs it, and that opens up everything a little bit better. When it comes to my Determinate tomatoes, it's actually really different. For my Determinate tomatoes, you don't want to prune those to a single stem or even to a double main stem, because Determinate tomatoes grow to a certain size and then they start to produce their flowers and their fruit. So any suckers or anything you prune off of them is going to reduce the amount of fruit that you are going to get from your plant. So for my Determinate tomatoes, I actually am trellising those the Florida weave method, where you essentially put stakes in the ground in between the tomatoes. You can put stakes at the end like I have it here, or you can put a stake for each tomato, and then you use some type of string or wire and weave that around the tomatoes. And so essentially the string is around each plant and holding the plant up. That's what I'm using this year for my tomatoes, and so far it's going well. I just finished this trellis a few days ago because I had been putting it off because I had other garden chores to do and, you know, home chores, things like that. So I finally got to it, and now they're looking nice because what it does is it holds the tomato plants up so that they're not on the ground, so that the fruit isn't on the ground, so the plants aren't on the ground picking up diseases, and it just makes it a little easier for picking the fruit. Now, you can see that I have a lot of plants in this 4x8 bed, but they're still able to kind of sit up, and I'm able to keep stuff off the ground. So in pruning these, my main goal of pruning is just getting rid of branches that somehow seem to be in the way, and I only remove the green foliage branches. So the branches that are not going to bear fruit, you can tell because those are the ones that come out more horizontally and they just have leaves on them, rather than the suckers that are eventually going to become, you know, fruiting areas of the plant. So I only remove that type of foliage, and I remove it when it is on the ground or touching the ground, or if it looks discolored in any way. The next thing that I do to keep my tomato plants growing nice and healthy and productive all season is to fertilize them. Now, when it comes to fertilizers, I'm probably on the more lazy end. Some people, I see videos and they have these beautiful gardens and are very, very regimented and make sure that they use different fertilizers, water soluble, every single week. They're out there fertilizing, and that is so great because usually people that do that have beautiful gardens. However, I don't like to do that because I don't have time, for one, and I just don't want to fertilize that frequently. So for me, I use a granular slow release fertilizer for pretty much everything. I do some things a little bit different with my fruit trees, like with some of my perennials and also with my onions, but otherwise with some of my annual vegetables, vegetables and fruits get the same treatment. Right now, this season, I'm using Garden Tone. Last season, I used something else, but same idea. This is a slow release granular fertilizer. It's a 3-4-4. It also has calcium, magnesium, sulfur, so it's something that is great for pretty much any fruiting plant that you're going to grow in your garden, fruiting or flowering actually, that you're growing in your garden. So that makes it easy for me because I was able to, you know, search out a bunch of prices and find the fertilizer that worked best, and that's how I ended up with this one. And I was also able to get a big giant bag of it for a good price, and I can just use it for everything. It just makes my life a lot easier. And because it's a granular, slow release fertilizer, it also means that I do not have to fertilize frequently. I fertilize the tomato plants behind me that are growing very, very well. I fertilized these when I planted them the first week of April, like that first weekend of April. I want to say it was like the 2nd. It is now the 22nd, I believe, of May. So it's been 7 weeks since I fertilized these plants, and they are doing excellent. So I'm going to fertilize them today because now they have set a lot of fruit. They're going to be in the process of ripening that fruit and continuing to grow. So for me, I fertilize, like I like to stick with kind of that every 4 to 8 weeks. And because they've been growing so well, I erred on the longer side. I decided to go on the longer side. So it's 7 weeks, so I'm going to go ahead and fertilize these, which means that I probably won't fertilize them again until, the end of June or early July at the rate that I'm going. So 7 weeks this year. And now I do adjust that. If my plants start to look like they need fertilization, then I'll adjust it. Now I have them really packed in here, and tomatoes are heavy feeders. So I'm liberal when I do fertilize them, but I still, even with, 20 plants or so in this small bed behind me, I still am able to get away with just fertilizing them, every 7 weeks. And as you can see, they're not hurting for fertilizer. I could probably go another week or two and the plants would be just fine. But regular fertilization is incredibly important to keeping your tomatoes healthy. How you go about that will vary based on just your personal preferences, the fertility already in your soil, the density at which you're growing them. All of those things are going to make a difference. It's not hot today like it has been, so everybody's outside, so I can hear my neighbors across the alley really loud, but they're outside, so I can't even be mad. The third thing that I do to keep my tomatoes growing healthy and productive all season is to water them deeply. Now, of course, if you're not getting enough rain, you're gonna have to water your garden. But tomatoes are particularly finicky when it comes to watering. If tomatoes are watered inconsistently, that can lead to things like cracking of the fruit, especially if they get a lot of water all at once, and then no water, and then a lot of water all at once, which of course you don't want. Insufficient watering or inconsistent watering can also lead to blossom end rot. A lot of people think that that is a calcium deficiency, and it kind of is. It's a calcium deficiency when the fruit is forming, but that is generally caused by them not being watered effectively, because then that makes it to where the calcium in the soil cannot be taken up by the plant. So there are definitely things that can go wrong with your tomatoes if they're not watered effectively. Now for me, I like to water very deeply with my plants. And watering deeply simply means you're watering in such a way that the water penetrates the soil 7 to 10 centimeters, which I want to say is about 4 or 5 inches, rather than just watering such that it's getting the first inch or so of soil wet. Doing that encourages the plant to develop longer, deeper roots. And the great thing about that, one, obviously, more stable plants and they have longer, deeper roots, but them developing a strong taproot also means they're gonna be a little bit more resilient when there is drought. And so if you water your plants deeply, then you're not gonna have to water them nearly as frequently because the roots are deeper into the ground, and that causes them to be able to find water that is spread around or water that's deeper into the soil, rather than their roots staying shallow because that's where the water always is. So I water my tomato plants deeply, and even here in the summer, in the hot Texas summer when it's 90, 100 degrees, I still only water my plants that are in my raised beds. I don't water them more frequently than every other day, sometimes every 3 days when it's really hot. Now you'll see people that say they have to water their garden every day or every other day. Now if they're in containers, I completely understand that, because my containers, I have to water them pretty much every day unless we have a really cool or overcast day, or of course unless it rains. So I understand that containers just dry out. You don't really have any control over that. But in a raised bed or in the ground, now some of it of course depends on your soil type, but here where I live, I can get away with it because I water deeply. And generally, if you're, I have clay soil underneath my raised beds. My raised beds obviously have some really nice compost mixed in, like nice soil for my plants. But I am able to get away with watering every 2 to 3 days. So if you have that type of soil and you're having to water your raised beds, every single day, then you might want to check and see if you're actually watering your plants deeply, and see how deep. You can just reach your finger into the soil and feel about how deep into the soil the water is getting when you water. Thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you got some tips that you can use in your garden to help your tomatoes grow even more healthy this season. If that is the case, then go ahead and hit that like button to let me know that you liked it, and of course that also helps this video get out to more gardeners across YouTube. And if you're interested in more gardening content like this, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel and hit that bell notification so that you never miss an upload. And I'll see you at the next one. Bye.